Many in Singapore will remember the 9th of August 1965 and how they felt when they heard that Singapore was no longer part of Malaysia.
I felt fearful because I thought that Singapore, being a small city-state, we may not be able to defend ourselves.
We had always been brought up to consider Singapore and Malaysia as one economic entity. And now Singapore was on its own. I really wondered what was going to be the result.
Oh, I felt relieved, liberated. I felt like a young girl who has reached her the 21st birthday. I felt now we can do what we think is best for ourselves.
For Singapore, it was thought that merger with Malaya was best for its survival, both economically and politically. A small island republic with no natural resources could not be viable on its own. Besides, Singapore had strong historical and economic links with Malaya, and it seemed most natural for it to be part of the same political system.
Let's get together, sing a happy song.
So many welcomed the formation of Malaysia in 1963. But there were difficulties. For a start, Singapore did not quite fit into the Malaysian political mold. On its own, it had a predominantly Chinese population. The government firmly believed in equality for all races. In Malaysia, however, the central government endorsed the principle of Malay political dominance. The ruling party coalition was led by the United Malays National Organization UMNO and its alliance partners, the Malayan Chinese Association and the Malayan Indian Congress.
The UMNO Malay leaders wanted to create in Malaysia a Malay Malaysia. The People's Action Party government wanted to fight for a Malaysian Malaysia. And this was the non-Malays aspiration for Malaysia. One sought to establish a Malaysia where Malay supremacy and Malay dominance is an accepted fact of life. The PAP's Malaysian Malaysia argued for a equality of treatment for the different racial groups.
Conflict surfaced during the 1963 Singapore general election when Malays in Singapore were asked to vote for the Singapore UMNO by Tunku Abdul Rahman, UMNO leader and Malaysian Prime Minister. The PAP saw this as an intrusion into Singapore's domestic politics. Matters worsened in 1964 when the PAP fielded candidates in the Malaysian general election because the party felt that it should have a pan-Malayan outlook. At its rallies, it not only argued for equality for all races and a Malaysian Malaysia, but also said that it would be a more effective partner for UMNO than the MCA. This caused resentment from both MCA and UMNO leaders. UMNO saw the PAP fight for a non-communal Malaysia as an attempt to change the existing political order in Malaysia. It launched an attack against the PAP. At a convention of 150 Malay organizations in Singapore, Syed Jafar Alba, Secretary General of UMNO, accused the PAP of discriminating against the Malays in Singapore and not helping them to improve economically. He urged Malays to unite to overcome this unfair treatment. The Jawi Malay press, Utusan Melayu, took up the issue against the PAP and further heightened racial feelings. Things came to a head on the 21st of July, 1964. As a procession to celebrate the birthday of Prophet Muhammad approached the Kallang Gas Works, a scuffle broke out. It escalated into a riot as Malays and Chinese turned against each other. Vehicles were burnt, houses set on fire, and innocent people attacked. Curfew was imposed on the whole island, and for a long while, the racial groups lived in fear of each other. Even before the tension could subside, another racial riot broke out on the 5th of September 1964. Alarmed by the riots, both the UMNO and the PAP agreed not to discuss communal issues publicly for the next 2 years. But there were problems on the economic front as well. In December 1964, Tun Tan Siew Sin, the Malaysian finance minister, wanted Singapore to increase its contribution to the federal fund. The Singapore government was unhappy over this for a number of reasons. It had hoped to benefit economically from a Malaysian common market, but progress towards this end had been slow. Furthermore, Singapore trade had been badly affected by the Indonesian confrontation. For these reasons, Singapore was reluctant to give more to the federal fund. In the months that followed, tension continued to build up. In May 1965, the PAP formed the Malaysian Solidarity Convention, bringing together several major opposition parties from Malaya and Sarawak, who were willing to fight for a democratic Malaysian Malaysia. UMNO members saw the convention as an opposition conspiracy and feared that the Singapore Prime Minister planned a Chinese takeover of Malaysia. The situation had by now become very volatile. To defuse the political tension and to avoid a full-scale racial clash, Tunku Abdul Rahman decided that Singapore had to leave Malaysia.
For some time, there have been differences between the central government and the leaders of the Singapore state government. And these differences take so many forms and are of so many kinds that it has not been possible to resolve them. And so we decided that we must part company.
My first reaction was, of course, shock. I was hurriedly summoned to Kuala Lumpur by the Prime Minister. He was there earlier. I traveled by car. In the early hours of the morning, I think, left Singapore at 1 o'clock. Arrived down there about 6 o'clock. Half days, and there I was told, you are out of Malaysia by the Prime Minister. Now go and think it over. It was, of course, a big shock to me.
In Singapore, the Prime Minister met the press. He too had been unprepared for this turn of events.
I said, when I first met the Tunku at 12:30 on Saturday morning, I was still not convinced that in spite of everything Dr. Goh had told me, I did not believe that there was no other way. I believed then that I could still convince the Tunku that there were a number of other ways of reducing communal tensions in Malaysia, such as a looser federation. But after my talk with the Tunku, I realized there was no other way than what he thought was the solution. That means we have to leave Malaysia. You know, every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish. I mean, for me, it is a moment of anguish because all my life I had believed in merger and the unity of these two territories.
Suddenly, Singapore was thrust with the independence it was unprepared for. The question was whether it could survive as an independent nation.
This concern, in fact, resulted in a certain galvanization of support behind the People's Action Party. I think Singaporeans felt that they really had to stand behind the government in this very new period when we had to work out an existence for ourselves.
In retrospect, of course, what it did was to give Singapore a shot in the arm. People realized they were on their own, and it acted as a catharsis and a sort of liberation of new creativity. And really, Singapore never looked back.